And awesome. Yeah, so I'll begin then on the count of three. 3, 2, 1. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me start that again. Fucked up. 3, 2, 1. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jamie from Scotland Remote Workers. Today, I'm joined by James Mcintyre, a freelance process automation engineer. He's joining us today to tell us a little bit about his journey into remote work, some of the work that he's currently doing in Scotland, and his take on the remote work landscape here. Welcome, James.
It's great to be here, Jamie.
Thank you very much. So just before we get into the proper conversation, just like to ask you a small icebreaker question, which is, what is something about yourself that not many people know?
Oh, possibly that I played steel pan for 9 years.
Oh, well, okay. Not what I was expecting. Amazing. So I think for this episode then, where I'd like to start is just chronologically. So you were a full-time software engineer for quite some time, right? 4 or 5 years before starting JM Automations, I believe. So I'm just quite curious to know what your pathway was into going freelance then. If you can tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, certainly. So, well, firstly, how I got into development itself was that I was doing what we call in the industry shadow development. So I was actually working as technically an analyst, and essentially our team needed some development done that the company, while it had a development department, didn't have the capacity to achieve in the time scale we needed. So that's how I got into doing some development for that team, effectively unofficially, but kind of authorized through the hierarchy. That then essentially got noticed by the automations team, which is one of the teams in the development department of Utility Energy. And so I ended up working for the automations team as you say, an actual official professional developer. But essentially what I found in that team was that the way I was already doing automations, I personally found to be more effective and more efficient than the way that they were doing that, the software that they were using. So essentially, I had discussions with my manager about that, and I built, at first the same process using both different methodologies, had it all peer reviewed and everything. And essentially I was allowed to carry on using my own methodology because I showed, at least in my case at that point, that it was more effective. And then after that, because I carried on doing that and showing how effective it was, I essentially started training people around me. They got other people to do the same kind of way of creating automations as myself. And that became essentially a sub-team to that team. And so essentially, that is where I realized that there was essentially a hole in the market, really, for doing automation with this alternative methodology to the industry standard, essentially. And so I actually spent a short period at another company in between, but essentially I decided to branch out on my own with that methodology, if that makes any sense. Technically, I'm not sure if methodology is the right legal term, because I've actually had some advice from Enterprise Scotland about intellectual property, and I think they actually technically call it's tacit knowledge rather than a methodology. And I own my own tacit knowledge, and essentially the way that I do automations now on my own is developed based on my own tacit knowledge, is I think how the legal IP framework works.
Yeah. Okay. Just for clarity for anyone who's watching this, can you explain a bit about what a process automation engineer actually does?
Yes, yes, of course. So essentially, in every organization, there are always a lot of people, maybe arguably even most people, with at least some processes that they're doing that are both repetitive and on a computer. So they might be translating records on a spreadsheet from one format to another. They might be going onto a web page and taking some information and putting that down on a spreadsheet or into a database. They might be doing a mail merge every week. They might need to, in the case of an energy company, credit meters of people that had won like an internal lottery, like we had at Utility Energy. So essentially anything that is repetitive and on a computer is very automatable. And when you automate those kind of processes, not only does it save the time of the people that are doing it, allow them to do more productive human work and actually more interesting work as well, but it also allows that kind of work to be done much more quickly, because obviously an automation can process a lot more records per minute than a human being can. And also once you've got all of the kind of the rules for how this process needs to be done in place and correct, it's much more accurate than a human being as well, because a human being will make mistakes, whereas an automation will always do the exact same thing according to the rules that's been programmed. So once you've got the automation locked in the first place, it reduces the inaccuracies, the mistakes.
Right. Okay. Yeah, makes complete sense. So you said that in your when you first got into process automation engineering, it's a bit of a mouthful to say that every time.
Yeah, I know.
So when you first got into that, it was kind of because your company gave you some unofficial work, let's say, which led you getting into this field. Did you have a pre-existing interest in automation before that?
I think I've always been interested in essentially making things more efficient, really. I think I've always kind of looked for ways that things could be done better, essentially. So yeah, I think I've for at least a long time, I'm not sure I can say always when I was a toddler or something, but for a long time I've had an interest in essentially what is effectively productivity.
But then it was mostly initially learning on the job at first, I'm assuming.
Yes, absolutely. So I'd done some programming a little bit as a child. There was a kind of a family friend, a kind of a non-blood uncle kind of a person that taught me some programming, and I did a little bit in sixth form college in England, and then I studied physics at university in Glasgow at Strathclyde University. And we did a Java module, so I did a bit there as well. So I did have a bit of a background in some level of programming, but I actually ended up learning Python, which I hadn't used before in Utilita, because me and my manager decided that was the best technology and the most versatile one for these kind of tasks. So yeah, I learned that on the job. Essentially, I learned the kind of the smaller things that the team needed first of all, and I slowly built up, really.
Yeah, I ask you those questions because I find your story quite relatable. It's funny because I think in Scotland there's a lot of young people coming out of the universities, have amazing tech courses here, design courses here. There's a lot of people coming out of the universities that feel like they need to have everything figured out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's often the case that you just end up trying a bunch of things and end up falling into something almost at random, right?
Yeah.
And you just find a passion through that. So I find that quite, relatable, how you almost, started unofficially and then kind of fell into just absolutely loving it to the point where you're developing your own tacit knowledge, let's say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a bit of a paradox actually in the working world where employers always want 5 or even 10 years experience for even the most junior roles. And how would you expect people to get that experience if if even in the most entry level positions, you don't hire people with no experience. And obviously that is a paradox, and yet we do have people doing these roles. And I think that essentially how that paradox is resolved is by people essentially doing what I'm doing. I think you're right. I think I'm not that unusual in that people essentially just do things that aren't technically in their job remit. And if they manage to do it well, then they're allowed to carry on doing it. And then that gives them the experience to then do it officially.
Do you think those job adverts where they see like 5 years experience for a junior level role, do you think they're genuinely looking for that? Or do you think they would consider anyone that feels like they're good enough for it?
I think they would absolutely consider anyone that's that is essentially qualified in different ways. Really, I mean, I experienced it in my team, and well, in different teams that I've worked. Really, they've always posted job descriptions that I've looked at, and I've been skeptical, shall we say, as to whether they're going to find someone with all of those qualifications at the level that the job is being posted at. And I would say from my experience that it tends to be that employers will overshoot for what they're actually looking for. So yeah, absolutely. If anyone is listening to this and is looking to apply for some kind of professional role and they feel intimidated by the kind of qualifications it's asking for, I would advise you don't feel intimidated by it. If you think you could do the job, then you should apply for it, because most jobs, or at least a lot of jobs, I think that they're overshooting. They're not going to get everything that they're asking for. So you're really only competing with other people that are applying for it.
To an extent, I understand the strategy. Like, they're looking for the prodigy among the among the talent pool. But I completely agree. Like myself, I'm a self-taught software engineer, right? And one piece of advice that I received when I was getting career mentorship for my first job, on my CV, I'd been calling myself an aspiring developer. The word aspiring was showing a lack of self-confidence. And the moment I removed that, I started to get more responses from the job applications. And it just kind of made me feel like this whole, these adverts is more like a self-confidence game. If you believe that you're good enough for the job and you're outgoing enough to actually try and convince the hiring manager, if you can find them, like, I think they absolutely would consider you. But people that don't think they're good enough are probably filtered out a little more easily, I suppose. That's how it comes across. And I'm curious then, so you've been working full-time as a process automation engineer for quite some time, and then you decided it was the right move to go into setting up JM Automations and becoming freelance. What made you decide that was the next move for you?
Well, as I said, I did spot that there was a gap in the market, essentially. So in terms of process automation engineering, at least in the British Isles, it tends to be done on one of two different platforms, different packages. One is called Blue Prism, the other one is called UiPath. And essentially those packages are very expensive. And I by then knew that I was able to do automations better, for lack of a better term, in almost every criteria, and equaled in most of the criteria that it's not better in than those two platforms, despite the cost of these platforms. So these companies don't actually advertise how much they charge on the website, and therefore companies will negotiate different amounts. But just to give you an idea, we are talking about hundreds of thousands of pounds per year that companies are paying for these automation packages, and that's before they even hire any process automation engineers to actually use those packages to create automations. So I thought that's a pretty significant gap in the market, with how expensive those platforms are, and the fact that they even with the most skilled process automation engineers, they produce less stable automations than the way that I do it. And the way that I've also shown that I can train other people to do it just as easily as you can be trained in Blue Prism or UiPath from the same kind of starting base, essentially. Yeah, sorry. Does that answer your?
Yeah, absolutely does. Like, I'm just curious to know about your path, because people listening who are maybe curious about going into remote work, they're probably quite wanting to know what made you decide that now was the right time. So I feel like a lot of people these days, they can dwell on that decision for a very long time before deciding to make the leap. I'm curious to know. So when you went freelance, there's a lot more that goes into it then, right? Because you're essentially running a business, not just taking on some freelance jobs here and there, but you're actually, taking out your own accounts and everything. How did things change for you at that point?
Quite a lot. It's very different, I would say, to working for a company. And I think that swings both ways. It's both a lot better in many ways and a lot worse in many ways. So being your own boss, I think, genuinely is as good as everyone says it is, as people dream of it being. I think that it just is. You can do things the way that you think things should be done, essentially, and that's massive. You can do things when you want to do them, essentially, unless there's some kind of actual deadline coming up, and that is massively freeing, especially in the kind of economic circumstances that we are here in the West. But on the other hand, not having any guaranteed income whatsoever is very stressful, and having to do everything yourself is also very stressful, and it takes quite a lot of learning to task swap effectively between essentially managing your own infrastructure, from your email domains, which includes your calendar, and your whole structure of how you work operationally, to your legal structure, to your actual finances. There's just so many different facets. You're wearing so many hats, as it were, that it does take quite a lot of thinking to work out ways of effectively task switching, which take very different thought processes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine when you take the leap, there's quite a lot of fear and doubt that comes along with that. I'm sure you probably experienced that initially, but now you probably settled into it after all this time. Like, I think that's one of the things that puts a lot of people off going down this route, because of all that uncertainty and the unsureness of how to deal with that really starting out. So it's good to hear that you kind of went through that period as well. So I want to ask you a little bit about Scotland itself. So as a remote worker now, in Scotland, do you feel like it's very well equipped for what you need currently? How do you view the current landscape here?
So I'm lucky in that, because I went to Strathclyde University, I have access to Strathclyde University's business hub. It's called the Inspire Hub, and anyone that went to Strathclyde University and is starting a business has access to that space to use as an office, and that is actually pretty huge. To be honest, having that office space is a really nice office space. The people in there are really nice. The atmosphere's, for lack of a better term, very nice. And there's a fridge and a microwave and all of those kind of things. And it sounds like it's something quite basic when most people have a home to work in, and I do here as well. I'm actually speaking to you from my home just now. I think that it's pretty huge to not have to always work in your home space, to be able to get into an office space where there's other people around, is a really good change of pace, and is quite good for a different kind of mindset to the kind of one that you get when you're actually physically working from your own home. So I think that I'm very lucky that I can access that for free. If I couldn't access that for free, then I wouldn't be able to access it at all, because I've just not got that guaranteed income to pay for other kind of spaces. So yeah, I think that's maybe one thing that's possibly missing in Scotland in that regard. How you'd exactly solve that, though, because obviously the office space does cost money. So how you would resolve that particular issue, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm trying to think, because obviously this is quite a broad question. Is there any other areas regarding remote working that you've got any questions around?
So just building on what you said, it's quite interesting to hear your perspective on co-working spaces, because you have access to the Inspire Lab, you said, right, in Strathclyde.
Yeah, the Inspire Hub. Yeah.
Inspire Hub. Sorry. Yeah. It's interesting to hear that you put off going to other co-working spaces, because there is like a charge to have some desk and some private space, right? And the uncertainty of the income makes it less likely that you want to use those facilities. The only one I can think of, in fact, in Glasgow, which is free, is BIOS Community Hub, if you're familiar with that.
I think so.
It's part of Glasgow University, but it's completely free Monday to Friday to use. The only issue being that there's not always guaranteed areas with plug sockets around. So you're always, unless you got a MacBook with a 24-hour battery life, as opposed to my laptop, which has about one, then you're a bit screwed. Do you think in the past couple of years, because you've been doing JM Automations now just under 2 years, right? Yeah,
about 2 years.
Do you see much development going on in Glasgow or Edinburgh or anywhere else you're familiar with in Scotland, like in terms of the remote work ecosystem in a positive way?
Development of remote working infrastructure, you're saying?
Yeah.
I've not seen many changes in the last 2 years. No, I can't think of any particular changes.
How about the community here? It's
a really good community. Yeah, no, it's an absolutely fantastic community. Particularly in the Inspire Hub, it's really great people that I work with in there. Both the other entrepreneurs in the hub, as well as the staff that run it. And then I've met some great people in other spaces as well. I think that we met each other in the Barclays Eagle Lab, I believe.
Yeah.
And there's some great people in there as well. It's definitely a great community vibe in Glasgow.
So you'd say you never really struggle to keep yourself professionally connected, let's say, meeting new contacts, networking, that sort of thing?
I suppose so. I would say it is swings and roundabouts. I suppose so. In terms of like networking, the JavaScript meetup has been very, very consistent and has been really good. However, there was a long spell when the Python developers weren't able to meet up, and I think that my understanding about that is that all of these meetups essentially are dependent on someone volunteering to actually do the organizational work for free. I think there's I believe there's some funding you can apply for in terms of possibly getting a room, possibly in terms of maybe getting some pizza for the meeting. But there's actually one thing that I think that maybe could be done better is possibly in the code base, which I think is also in the Barclays Eagle Lab. I believe that that it has some staff that are funded by the Scottish government, and I think that one thing that could be improved is maybe if maybe part of the job role of one of those people even could be to organize some of these meetups, because I think that they're actually pretty huge for for the Scottish economy, essentially, because I think that software development is pretty huge for the economy, and it would be something that there would be quite a high return on investment if the Scottish government were to, and the Glasgow City Council was to invest in those kind of events.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the only fund that's freely available right now is it's called the Tech Communities Fund. Gives a £1,000 grant for exactly what you're talking about, essentially booking space and pizza, drinks, whatever. Yeah, I'm not sure what else you put it towards. Any plans for a process automation meetup?
Possibly. Yeah. No, I have been thinking about that. At some point, I might do some kind of an automation event. No concrete plans yet, but watch this space.
Yeah, I think you get a lot of people interested in that one very quickly. I'd sign up. Going back to process engineering and process automation engineering, sorry. How do you see that having an impact on remote work going forwards? I'm curious if that's something you've thought about.
I'm not sure about remote work per se, but I think that remote work, especially in this day and age, I think is generally the same kind of work as we do in physical offices anyway. Essentially, whether it's remote work or whether it's working in office, there is a lot of this kind of essentially monotonous work. As I said, like doing mail merges every week or whatever it is, things that are just essentially repetitive and bore human beings to tears when they do them for long enough, that could be completely automated away. Now I think there's a danger in that, because I think particularly some companies in the West, I think, have taken a view that when you automate these kind of tasks, the best benefit you should take from that is to reduce people's hours, or even actually make redundancies as a benefit to the company, because you can have the same output for a lower wage bill. But I actually think that is very short-sighted, as well as unethical, because the thing is that what you can do instead, and this is what I talk about at JM Automations, is you can use the time that is saved by a worker no longer having to do a certain monotonous task, first of all, to find new things that bluntly can bring in money to the organization. So if they've been saved 10 minutes a day, they can spend 10 minutes doing some research into some different things that they could be doing to bring in the company some more money. And then once they've found something that would take them 10 minutes or less a day to do, they can then start doing that thing. And you can actually bring in more money than was originally being brought in for the same amount of person hours. And I think that actually in the long run, that would actually bring in more money for the company than making the saving that you would make. I think there's a lot more you can do with that. Essentially, the more tasks that you create, you can then also start looking at automating those tasks. And I think that there's a lot of growth that can be had via automation.
Yeah, I get that. So in a sense, automation is encouraging innovation then. So reallocating people into new projects and finding new ways to improve the company and automating those processes as well. Isn't that quite finite though? Wouldn't it reach a point where you feel like there's nothing else really a person could do to provide value in the way that they want to, and that they'd have to start looking elsewhere?
I'm not sure, really. I mean, I feel like you could argue it either way. I feel like even if you were to make the argument, then I would argue that we're a long way away from there.
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot that you could do before it's even arguable that you're going to get to that point. But then there's the other argument about if that would ever happen, because essentially, anyone that's spent any time in a business will know that if something is valuable to do, you're almost always going to do it more than once. And then when you end up doing a process more than once, when it starts happening multiple times, it just makes sense to find more efficient ways of doing that. And then naturally, when you do that, it becomes repetitive. Okay, so it then provides itself scope for automation. So I think essentially what can really happen is at first it's only the very core functions of an organization that might be automated, and there's just a few things that are happening on the periphery that are not, but then those tasks in themselves become increasingly valuable for the company, and they start being done more and more often. They start getting optimized, and then, as I said, they can then be automated. But then that essentially allows you to then get onto this to the next ring, as it were, for the next tasks that couldn't have been done before because you didn't have capacity for, and you've now got capacity for. So I think it's at least arguable that can essentially go on forever. So yeah, I think you could argue it either way, but even if you were to argue that it would end, then I think that we're just so far away from that. There's just so much monotonous work being done at the moment that I certainly can't see it happening in my lifetime.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's an interesting take because there's so much fear mongering in the media now about automation taking away people's jobs. But yeah, perhaps it is a little short sighted in that it's about reallocating people and finding value in other parts of the business they can provide, right? So I think being adaptable is one of the key skills going forwards.
Yes, I essentially agree from a technical point. I 100% agree with you, and from a JM Automation's point, definitely, because I actually refuse to work with anyone that is saying that they intend to use my automation work to put people out of jobs. I'm not going to work on that basis. But then when we look at the economics of the type of capitalism that we have here in Scotland, in the UK, particularly in the US, I think that there is a fair amount, unfortunately, of that kind of short-sightedness at the heads of particularly large organizations. And so I do think that there is a genuine fear of there being mass redundancies. And I think also, particularly with generative AI, with how much this kind of automation could really become accelerated without this kind of foresight I'm talking about, of looking for growth, where people just want a very short-term cut to their outgoings, and they're not interested in even quite a short-term growth to their income. Like they're just not even looking at growing their income. They're only looking at making cuts. I think that there is a political danger to that. So I think there's two different sides to that. We don't have to be worried about mass layoffs, because I think that all of this can just help humanity. But from a political angle, there is a lot of short-sightedness in the UK and particularly America, but also other Western countries where it is being used for the wrong reasons, and it's dangerous, and it could lead to a very dark place.
So I'll take you back a little bit. I think for anyone listening to this video, they're probably quite interested in learning more about process automation themselves. What advice would you give to someone who's trying to break into it?
Essentially, I would give the same advice as I would give to anyone trying to break into essentially a very industry professional field. I think things are a bit different possibly in some of the public sector rather than the private industry sector. See opportunities, see possibilities in a job that you're currently in, about where you can essentially do things out with your technical job role. See if you can get agreement from your land manager to do those things. So particularly talking about automations here, think about the kind of work that you're currently doing where you could actually automate your own work and then essentially do it. That is not just from my experience, from speaking to a lot of people that have got into these kind of roles. That's how they tend to do it, is essentially just finding those opportunities where can you automate your own work, and then by doing so, first of all, you impress your managers by how productive you become, because a lot of the things you were doing are now automated, and you're able to do a lot more yourself. But then also you're likely going to get noticed within your company, or even if you don't, you can then put it on your CV, the actual automations that you've done. So I think that's the way forward.
No, I thought that was really good advice there. So it's basically looking at where you are now and analyzing the work that you do and seeing where you can really have an impact on that front and take the initiative to actually just improve your own job, essentially improve the quality of your own work, free yourself up to do the stuff you're more interested in. Completely agree. I can think of plenty of examples of my current job now, which I'm thinking I might follow your advice. Amazing. So I'll leave it with one last question for you then, because we're just reaching the end of the time that I have. So I wanted to ask you, what is one piece of advice that you've received yourself in your career, which has really stuck with you to this day and you carry forwards?
So I'll give the advice that my maths teacher in sixth form college gave me, which is never get rid of anything until you've got something better to replace it with. So essentially, at the time, that was my maths. That was, the idea of not rubbing something out until I've got a better solution to replace it with. But I think that has served me very well in life in general. Even if you look at work you're doing, a workflow, whatever it is, don't get rid of it, no matter how bad you think it is, until and unless you've actually got something better to replace it with.
But no, thank you very much for your time today, James. That was a really interesting interview there, and I think people will learn a lot from you. Are people okay to reach out to you after this video?
Yes, please. I have a website, jmautomations.scot or jmautomations.net out with Scotland. I'm also on LinkedIn at JM Space Automations. And so yeah, essentially I can help organizations to optimize and automate anything, any of their workflows, particularly repetitive workflows on a computer, really. And I'm also working with some other developers right now to get a co-op as well, where we are going to be doing bigger pieces of work as well.
Amazing. I'll make sure to link those in the description of the video for you. But yeah, thank you so much for your time today, James. That was really interesting for me, and I hope it'll be super interesting for other people as well. But thank you for joining.
It's a pleasure, Jamie.
Cheers.